The Honourable Member for Carbonear-Harbour Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this resolution that will no doubt be supported by all members of this honourable House. Mr. Speaker, to begin with, this is an absolute honour for me to speak on anything pertaining to our fishery. As a lifelong fisherman, I have strong appreciation for the value the fishery brings, not just to our economy of our province and regions, but to our culture and our rural communities. Fish is what brought us here many centuries ago, and I'm confident that fish is what will keep us here for centuries to come, long after the oil and gas runs out, only if we do two things. First, we must take care of our resources. In 1992, moratorium on the cod fishing resource was one of the most devastating things that ever happened in our industry. We had a mass exodus of our people, which is one of the most precious resources we have. This ecological disaster must never, ever happen again, not to any of our fish species or to any future generations of our people. Secondly, we have to be vigilant in ensuring that the resource we have is shared in just an equal manner, so that the benefit of the fishery gift is shared by all, especially those closest to the resource. Which brings me to the resolution at hand, Mr. Speaker. It speaks of our northern shrimp resource and the need to manage it more fairly and equally among the various participants in that fishery. As we know, our shrimp resource has been declining in recent years, and there is a need for a precautionary approach to managing this fishery, which again, no one would argue against. As I say, we cannot and we must not have a repeat of 1992 moratorium in our shrimp fishery. So protecting our stocks is priority one. This private member's resolution speaks to how important the northern shrimp industry fishery is to our province. We have all heard the numbers before, but I think they are worth repeating. Our northern shrimp fishery and the northeast coast and Labrador supports over 250 enterprises, 1,500 crew members, 10 shrimp plants, and a 2006 study shows that an average plant processes 10 million pounds of shrimp per year. Each of these plants employ between 100 to 150 people who supports their family on this income. And it's not just direct jobs in the fishery. Statistics show that for every 100 jobs in the fish harvesting and processing sectors, and additionally 1.3 jobs are created outside of it. If the quotas cuts calm down, there's a fear that upwards of 750 jobs will be wiped out of our economy, not to mention at least 4 shrimp plants. These are not good numbers, any way you look at it, for our province. Mr. Speaker, I believe the resolution before us is more than a call for a simple policy change. I believe that is a cry from our people to the federal government for a better partnership on the fishery. As we know, under the terms of union in 1949, the federal government agreed to take over management of the fishery. It has been 66 years since this momentous agreement, and the experience has showed that people in Ottawa are poor managers of our fishery. It is a failed experience, Mr. Speaker. As one fisherman said to me, the definition of a federal Tory minister is somebody who never ever wipes salt water from their eyes. This is sad and a stark reality, and there is not a year nor a season that goes by that does not illustrate the federal government does not truly understand our fishery and why it is so important and how it should be managed. It seems we have to fight with the feds on everything in the fishery in order for them to see how it should be used to the benefit of our province. Not good enough, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the shrimp crisis we have in our province today is really a crisis in partnership between the federal and the provincial governments. Mr. Speaker, failures of the provincial government, and I believe that the current provincial government has to be held accountable for not holding the federal government's feet to the fire on the fisheries file over the years. To begin with, the current administrations had shown little or no interest since the RMS fiasco in our wild fishery. And poor relationship this government had with Ottawa is also another factor why our fishery is suffering as it is. This government is not engaged with the fishery and not engaged with the federal government, and in a proactive and a meaningful way to ensure our fishery thrives and not struggles along. I want to point out several areas where this government has failed, short on efforts to press the federal government to come to the table to dialogue about a better way forward for our fishery. In the federal election of 2011, then Premier Dunderdale wrote a letter to Prime Minister Harper on a number of issues, including fishery, and in his response was, and I quote from the PM, "The province must be given a formal role in management of our fisheries. A re-elected Conservative government will move forward with legislation in the next Parliament to give the province a formal role in management of our fisheries." There has not been any indication that this government held the Fed's feet to the fire to keep this important promise. This is the same PM who promised custodial management back in 2005, and again, still no indication of the federal government engaged the Feds on this promise. The federal government instead reneged on its constitutional commitment to provide the science and more effectively manage our fisheries. What did the provincial government do? It invested money in the area Ottawa should be funding. While it is a good thing to have our own scientific information, it's not good enough that this government has allowed the Feds off the hook with respect to funding obligation. It is not good enough that we do not have a formal process to sit at the table and dialogue about our fishery issues. It's not good enough to rub shoulders with the federal minister at a trade show or in the US and talk about important fisheries issue. After 11 years at the helm of government, maybe this government did a better job of engaging the federal government, putting their feet to the fire on their promises. We would not be here speaking to this resolution on the fabricated policy called LIFO. Mr. Speaker, no matter how the current federal minister tries to rationalise her decision based on the late-to-the-party policy called LIFO, it is flawed. First of all, when the inshore sector was granted an opportunity to participate in northern shrimp fishery back in 1997, there was no mention of LIFO. Absolutely no mention. LIFO crept into the integral shrimp management plan by 2003. LIFO is an industry-driven policy. LIFO favours the offshore. LIFO will destroy rural communities. LIFO is not used in any other fishery. Now, Mr. Speaker, just to elaborate on this, this is not a battle about the offshore versus the inshore. This is something that our federal government has put those two groups into a fight, and the offshore as well as the inshore should be equal partners. And it's simply a policy that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans have the ultimate discretion to enforce or change. There is no historic significance. There is no precedent. This policy can and should be changed. And it is simply a policy that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans can ultimately, at her discretion, and to enforce change. There is no historic significance. There is no precedent. This policy can and should be changed. My concern, Mr. Speaker, is that LIFO in the shrimp sector is just a start. What is it to stop it flowing over into the crab fishery? Or any industry for that matter, where people have made huge investments in boats and equipment. And Mr. Speaker, just to elaborate a little bit on that there, I can remember first when I got into the crab fishery when I was fishing, I can remember it came out as a permit. And so then after 5 or 6 years as a permit, it turned into a license, and that's how we got into the crab fishery, Mr. Speaker. So if you can use the LIFO on the shrimp afterwards, you can do the same thing with the crab. So if trouble comes along right now with the crab, I would suggest to you that LIFO could also be used, therefore decimating many, many inshore harvesters. So I just want to just elaborate a little bit on that with you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the sharing of the resource by the federal government the past few years during the times during the times of quota cuts, but there are economic fallouts as well. The 2014 inshore quota for shrimp was down by more than £24 million from the 2013 quota. That meant the inshore fisheries had to shoulder 27% of the cuts last year, while the offshore took a 3% cut in quotas. Applying LIFO policy does nothing more than pitting the inshore against the offshore, and that attitude needs to change. That is unfair, unjust, and unreasonable, Mr. Speaker. Adjacency. What is fair and just, Mr. Speaker? It's a long-standing principle that the guided fisheries management in a province called adjacency. The Canadian government used the principle of adjacency and community and regional development benefits as criteria in granting offshore licenses to community-based organizations on the southeast coast of Labrador in 1978 and in granting similar special allocations to regional organizations on the Northern Peninsula in 1997. In 1997, when Minister Mifflin bumped up the TAC because the shrimp resource was growing and healthy to increase the opportunity to create new jobs for inshore fishermen and onshore plant workers, he specifically noted that adjacency would be respected. And I quote Mr. Mifflin, "In regards to the allocation of increase in shrimp quotas in areas 5 and 6, which are situated off the shores of Labrador and Newfoundland, I have been guided by the long-standing principle of adjacency, which will be respected. Those living closest to the stocks will benefit from it." In fact, even Prime Minister Stephen Harper in 2011 election letter to the province stated that adjacency would be the guiding principle in the management of our fish resource. Maybe it's time to have adjacency legislated. Even though it is enshrined in the shrimp management plan, it still seems to be overlooked when the decisions are made respecting our resource. Mr. Speaker, I was elected by the people of my district on November 26, 2013. In my maiden speech in December of that year, I stated that I would remain firm and deep in my belief with both rural Newfoundland and Labrador and in the fishery. I stated I would fight tooth and nail for our small rural communities. I also stressed that I'm a firm believer in joint management of our fisheries with all stakeholders and especially with the federal government. I also suggest that our fishery has to manage sustainability sensibly, and it must be done in collaboration with all stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, members of the House of Assembly have shown a spirit of collaboration. And when we got together and formed the all-party committee on the shrimp fishery, I was proud to be a part of this important initiative. We showed a similar spirit and collaboration when we headed to Gander earlier this month and attended a rally held by the FFAW to show our support for the future of rural communities at that rally. At that rally, I was especially touched by a woman, Heather Sparks, who's a proud and articulated fisher operating out of Carmenville. She came to share her passion for the fishery and to plead for a better sharing arrangement. Because you know what, Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Sparks and other fishers like her bring in brand new dollars into their communities. She is their entrepreneurship and hard work that will ensure the survival of rural Newfoundland and Labrador communities, and we need to fully support them. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, this government has spent millions and millions of dollars on award-winning tourism ads showcasing our province. Most of these ads highlight our wonderful rural communities. Because of our unique communities and our hospitality, good-natured people are drawn. But the inspiration to ensure our coastal communities survive is not just for the tourists to come visit. More importantly, our inspiration and commitment must be to ensure people stay in our communities and outports and keep our century-old culture and communities alive. Empty outports have been and always will be a crime against our people, Mr. Speaker. So this PMR is about securing the future of our coastal communities. With the LIFO policy, Applied to the management of the shrimp fishery, thousands of jobs are at risk due to an unfair sharing of the northern shrimp resource. Not acceptable. There has to be a new way forward. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry I ran out of time because I had just had another couple of pages go and I would have really liked to get out. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.